Good evening and welcome to the January 11th meeting of the Civil Service Commission. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Gazarian?
Here.
Yantis?
I'm here.
Gregorian?
Here.
Devine?
Here.
And for the record, Commissioner Manukian is absent.
Okay. Next item, please.
Minutes?
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. It's approved by unanimous consent. Next item, please.
Oral communications?
I have no cards. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to address the Commission on an item that's not before the Commission tonight? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item.
Recruitment and examination status report?
Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, before you is this month's recruitment and examination status report. As you can see from this report, each of the staff members' names are listed here along with their particular recruitment load. This shows the recruitments at various stages. Some are currently occurring, some are upcoming, and some are near completion. The report does indicate the filing period, the dates of the various examination processes, and really it's just provided for your information only to see where we're at in various stages of our recruitment at this point. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them. Again, this is a note and file item.
Are there any questions? No. Seeing none, we'll move on.
Eligible list established.
Mr. Doyle, please.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this brief report is a list of the eligible lists that have been established since our last meeting. As you can see from the report, we have a total of 5 lists that have been created following the various selection processes. We have 2 of them were open recruitments, 2 of them were promotional, and 1 is a promotional and open. The report again shows the total number of applications received for those positions, and then on the very far right column, the number of candidates who ultimately succeeded in those processes and made it onto our eligible list. As you can see, after the process is through, a relatively small number make it through that process, and you see lists with 1 name, 7 names, 2 names, 1 name, 4 names. So it's I think a testament to the I think difficulty of the processes and the high level of standards that we've set in these examinations. So again, if you have any questions on this, I'd be happy to try and answer them. This is a note and file item.
Yes.
Yes. As I recall, recently we lowered the qualification for this police lieutenant's position, and we received 13 of them. These 13 is, did we have any from outside or from everybody was from inside?
Commissioner Gregorian, we did make this examination a promotional and open, and I believe we had, was it 1 or 2 from the outside? 3 from the outside. This is Russ Kwan from our staff. The focus again was to encourage as many internal candidates to apply for this position, and as we traditionally do recruit our safety, our police and fire promotional exams internally. And I think through a lot of efforts by chief and command staff to try to encourage people to apply, as well as the decision to open this up, we did get I would say a satisfactory number of candidates for this exam. We would like to have seen more than just 2 pass the process, but ultimately we're going to keep trying, and hopefully we'll have a little larger list than this. But essentially, the two individuals were selected off this list and appointed. In fact, it was yesterday. It's the swearing in. So.
Sorry, you mentioned that 2 passed the examination, but how many openings did we have? Just 2 or more than that?
I believe, and I'll have Russ probably come up here, I believe we still have more openings than eligible candidates.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, Russ Kwan, Human Resources Analyst. At the time of the recruitment, we only had 2 vacancies, but we do anticipate additional vacancies later on this year.
Okay. Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll have the next item, please.
Revised class specification for approval, equipment maintenance supervisor and mechanical maintenance administrator.
Mr. Doyle, please.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this is the revision of class specifications in the Public Works mechanical maintenance area. We have two separate specifications being revised. One is the equipment maintenance supervisor, and that is a middle management position. The other is a mechanical maintenance administrator, which is a upper management position. These positions, again, are part of our Public Works operation. They now oversee all of the automobile vehicle maintenance for all the citywide garages. In fact, in the last few years, we've done consolidation of our garages because we do have vehicle fleets in our Public Works Department, our Water and Power Department, Police Department, and Fire Department. And prior to this, each ran their own garage. But in the past 2 years, we've hired on a fleet manager to consolidate. In fact, that individual is here today, and that has caused us to need to update these specifications. The consolidation, I think, has worked very well. But again, our need at this point is just to update the specifications for these two positions. One of them was last updated in 1992. The other was 1999. So this is merely an attempt to make these specifications more up to date and contemporary. The changes are not significant, but just really more added to the supervisory responsibilities. There's a greater emphasis on safety, greater emphasis on environmental regulations and things along those lines. So with that, these specifications are presented for your review. If you have questions, again, I'd be happy to try and answer them. My staff member, Narine Kasparian, worked on these, along with Carl Vogley, who is our fleet manager. They're both here today if you have specific questions.
Yes. I went through this. It's very interesting. In part of the essential function, I don't know, can we find somebody that has experience in lawnmowers, automobile trucks, tractors, motor sweepers, crane, graders, backhoe, trenching machines, skip loaders, fire engine, motorcycles? These are very specialized section of the automobile industry. And over in back, you can see the experience. 4 years of recent maintenance automotive equipment. So, I don't know. I mean, this gentleman over here, he has to be a very, very super engineer in automobile industry in order to know it. I mean, skip loaders, fire engine, and from motorcycles to lawnmowers. I mean, is it to find such a person that knows all these trades and everything, all the mechanical and technical information? Maybe this is just like a general information, but I just want to bring to your attention that is this the way that we go, I mean, to find somebody? Because this is part of the classification for this position.
Commissioner Gregorian, it is our objective to find people who have the knowledge in those areas. The individuals may not have specific knowledge in all of those areas, but again, depending upon the particular yard or facility they'll be working in, we'll certainly want to ensure that they have specific knowledge in, say, fire apparatus or lawnmowers or street sweepers or whatever the case may be. But and these are the two supervisory level positions, and really we do expect a broad level of knowledge. And what we do when we recruit for these positions, whether it's internally or promotionally, is put the individual through either written exam or oral boards, and we ask them as questions as we can about these various functions. And obviously the candidates who have the broader knowledge are going to do better. And but to say that the individual has to have full knowledge of every single piece of apparatus in every single garage is, I agree with you. It's probably asking for a lot. But again, these are our qualifications, and it's our hope to find the best candidate in this process.
Okay, thank you.
Question?
Move to accept.
I have one question before we second it. Some time ago, I heard that there was a I don't know whether for this position or not, but they were going to combine the fleet managers with different cities. In other words, we were going to, in order to save money, have one central fleet operation that would include, say, Burbank or Pasadena and Glendale. Is that correct or not?
Yeah, Chair Devine, I've not heard that. I mean, we're always discussing various ways of consolidating our work with our neighboring cities, particularly Burbank and Pasadena. I have not heard specifically about this particular one. It does make a lot of sense because, when we're talking about having somebody who can perform maintenance on fire trucks or something really complicated like that, it kind of doesn't make sense to have Glendale, one person in Glendale doing it, one person in Burbank doing it, one person in Pasadena. But I've not heard that unless Mr. Vogley is aware of any types of efforts along those lines. Not, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Good afternoon. I'm Carl Vogley. I'm the fleet manager for Public Works. In regard to your question, there's been discussion on forming like a purchasing alliance with the three cities for fleet products and vehicles, that sort of thing. And there's certainly informal cooperation that goes on with the fleet operations in the three cities. I'm not aware, as Matt said, also of any drive to actually centralize the management of the fleet operations.
Okay. That answers my question. I thank you.
And Mr. Chair, if I could add, just centralizing the management of the garages internally was a bit of a monumental undertaking. To go where we were probably 5 years ago, like I said, where we had management in Public Works, Water and Power, Police and Fire, all separate to where we are today, that was difficult to do. But for all the advantages, the economies of scale and such, it made a whole lot of sense. And again, the gentleman who just spoke is to his credit, he's been with us about 2 years, and that was his primary objective, was to make that occur, and it's been quite successful thus far. So.
Very good. Do we have a second for that?
Yes.
Okay, unanimous consent. Let the record show that Commissioner Manukian has joined us. Happy New Year to you and welcome.
Thank you. I apologize for running late.
Not a
We can
problem.
blame the 134 for that.
Okay. Move on to the next item, please.
Mr. Chair, if I could recommend we rearrange the order here, possibly for commissioner staff comments. And the reason I say that is I see our new city manager sitting in the back of the room, and whatever appropriate category under our agenda, he would like to be here to introduce himself to you. And
We will move that up forthwith.
okay.
Those are some of the perks of being city manager, I guess.
He's a very busy man these days.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Scott
Welcome.
Ochoa. I'm honored to be your new city manager. I have been talking with Matt quite a bit about the work that you do, and as someone who is very much interested in organizational management, organizational development, and leadership, I know that we'll be working very closely together. We've gone through a very trying period in terms of the recession and what that is doing and has done to our organization. So I think the effort, the work of the Commission has been amplified by all the trials and tribulations of this organization. Alas, we're not done yet. The economy hopefully is starting to ebb, knock on wood, but we also need to deal with all the other challenges that are there before us. That said, based on what I've seen, what I've heard, and certainly from the recommendation of staff, I am looking forward to being able to work with you in this new capacity. But I would be happy to answer any questions that you might have of me. And if not, I just wanted to come before you and say, yeah, I look forward to working with you, and I look forward to serving Glendale.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Cho. We're glad to have you in Glendale. I got the pleasure to drive through Monrovia the other day, coming back from the desert, and the work you've done there. I went up Myrtle Avenue. It's just splendid, so we look forward to having you here.
Thank you. Thank you.
My question to you, sir, is what did Matt say about our work, actually? More specifically about
The part
any
for the open session or the closed session? Nothing but the most positive comments, I assure you, sir. I assure you.
Thank you.
I, too, would like to welcome you. I saw you on your trial last night, your first meeting, and very much impressed with how you handled it. And I think the city of Glendale is very lucky to have you join us, and we appreciate it. And we look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And everything that you've heard about Commissioner Gantes is true.
Well, keep that in mind, too, sir.
Tough crowd.
We love him. Welcome aboard.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair,
Welcome.
if I may, go ahead. Sorry.
Welcome. I'm a long-time resident of Glendale, and my city is now your city, so I'm glad that you're here, and I look forward to working with you.
Thank you. In many ways, it's good to be home. We had lived here. My wife and I, our first apartment was here over on Sinclair, and very fond memories of Glendale. She grew up in the area when we were first married. And we moved to Mount Washington. There was, of course, nothing to do and that. And so Glendale was really our backyard. And so very familiar with the town. It's good to be home.
Again, welcome and thank you. And I believe in teamwork. And I don't want to mention that what can you do for us? What can we do together? So every one of us and the whole community, we have to stand behind you and stand together and to see that we can achieve the problems and pass these problems and achieve the goal that we have all together.
Absolutely.
Again, thank you again.
Thank you, sir.
Are we still at commissioner comments, or?
Yes, we are.
Okay, I wanted to take this opportunity to welcome Commissioner Gazarian.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I think you'll be a good addition to this commission. You come with a lot of knowledge, and for being here.
Thank you for allowing me to be a part of this process. Thank
We
you.
can learn a lot from you, so.
Commissioner Manukian, you were late. We had the dinner, so four of us we had.
Sorry?
You were late. We had the dinner.
Four of us have been invited to dinner. You're out.
So maybe your name is going to be in the list now.
That's okay.
As long as we're on commission comments, are there any other comments?
I do. Is this the portion where we're?
Yeah, we've moved that up, so
Very
that's,
well. I would like to ask from the Glendale Police Department's, specifically Internal Affairs Department, to give us an update as to a number of individuals, sworn officers, who I know have been on administrative leave for quite some time. I will not give names at this time, but I think that part of the process calls for a speedy resolution, and if there's additional time that the department needs, which is understandable in light of many unforeseen circumstances that may come up during the process, I think the commission ought to be notified and good cause ought to be found so that due process at all times is in effect, and the citizens of the city of Glendale do not have to have any particular numbers of their sworn members at home and administrative leave getting paid, but we, the citizens, not getting the benefit of their services. So with that, I am not casting any stones. I know the tough job that the various departments have to do in the city, and specifically in the police department. In this case, I only ask that perhaps someone from the Internal Affairs Department can come before this body at the next opportune moment and give us an update in a closed session, if need be, as to the status of some of these pending matters. Thank you.
I think that's a very good suggestion. However, I'd turn to our attorney to find out if that is something that's within the purview of the Civil Service Commission.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, Commissioner Gazarian, clearly it's not something that we could discuss at this point because it's not on our agenda. But to the extent that we can provide a report on the administrative leave policy and how that is administered by the police department, with the assistance of the chair, we will find an appropriate time on the agenda and bring that back as a report.
It is very well. That's acceptable to me. It is my understanding, based on research I have done, and I may be mistaken, I'm not the world's best researcher, that there is a time frame, and that is generally a 30-day period of time where discipline is either imposed or not imposed. But for good cause, the department ought to come before the commission and seek additional time. And I don't know if that's been done in the past, but now that I am part of this commission, I'd ask that it be done.
Mr. Chair, if I could comment on that, as to whether this falls under the Commission's purview, it certainly would. Under Rule 10 of our Civil Service rules, the provisions for ordered leaves of absence are within the scope of these rules. The 30 days that Commissioner Gazarian refers to is in fact true. The intent of any employee being placed on administrative leave is to be for 30 days. That can be renewed, and it certainly is in most cases, just because of the complexity of the investigation process, and then the decision to discipline or not to discipline, the preparation of all the paperwork, the due process requirements. Rarely have I experienced, whether it's been in police, fire, or any other department, all of that being wrapped up in 30 days. So this is routinely extended beyond the 30 days, and the rules do not per se require the Commission to approve any extensions beyond that. That's largely up to the department head in concurrence with the city manager. But again, it certainly is a topic that's appropriate for this Commission to consider, and we can work with specifically focusing on the police department, whatever cases that may affect. And I'll, without getting much further into this, it all has to do with workload and complexity of these cases. But we can come back at an upcoming meeting. Something.
I think also so when you guys do come back, I think it would be a good idea for us to see how other departments handle these situations, because it seems like it's the police department that takes longer. Now, obviously, there's other elements involved, but I think it'd be helpful for us to have an understanding, at least when other departments in situations like this, what is their standard process of doing it, so for us we would be able to get an idea.
Certainly.
Okay.
And I'd also like to clarify Mr. Gazarian's point that he was asking, I think, to include in there whether or not the police department is complying with the rules. It's one thing to bring back a report that says this is what they should be doing, but what I gathered was that, and I certainly agree with it, that we need to find out, again, if it's within our purview, as to whether or not the police department is in fact complying with those rules in terms of the number of people that may exceed the 30-day limit. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No, Chair Devine, you're correct. My primary focus is to ensure that each and every civil service employee in the city of Glendale has afforded his or her due process rights. At the same time, I have a dual interest to see to it that the citizens of the city of Glendale are getting the benefit of their tax dollars with respect to salaries being paid to civil servants who are at home for what I perceive to be far too long for no resolution to be had in some of the cases. With that, I am not part of the process in the investigative stages of any of these matters. I simply ask that the department perhaps illuminate the city management, the city attorney's office, and, if appropriate, the Civil Service Commission. Thank you.
Okay, we have two members that concur with that. Does anyone wish to comment? All right, then you'll bring that back at a time in the future, not too distant.
Sure.
Can I inquire, Mr. Chairman? Is this going to be is this come an open session, or would this be a closed session item?
Open session.
Again, as I understand, we're not going to be talking about specific names, just
Numbers,
cases, and such. My knowledge.
Well, I think this should be then for the entire city. I mean, I think we need to know every department, and that way we can better judge it based on what each department has in the way of those on administrative leave and the time. I think we're asking for the time that's been involved. I think that way.
Essentially, people currently on administrative leave, the numbers.
I don't think we should single out the police department. I think we should know everything.
I already asked them to compare it. It's not. I think we want to know all the departments, and then in comparison, we will have an idea if one department has more than the other ones, and the process itself.
It may, if I may, Chair, it may be a matter of lack of adequate resources in any one of these departments, whether it's police department, fire department, or otherwise, that is the cause of certain delays, perhaps. But it may not be. It may be, again, logistics. In my line of work during the day, I oftentimes ask for additional time to process my cases in courts around town, and that's understandable, and so do the opposing parties that I am up against. I'm simply asking to make sure that things are not left unattended to when they could be attended to more expeditiously for the benefit of both the civil servant involved, or servants for that matter, and the city, and the citizens of the city.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
This issue is going to be as an information purpose only, or just do we have any jurisdiction or authorization to ask any more questions? For example, scenario number one, if we get this information that police department has 3, while GW has 1, or the other departments have 2 and 4. So, what can we achieve from this? What's going to be the next step? Can we ask more questions and scrutinize the situation? And because I'm kind of lost, even if that's a very nice idea, very good idea to get information. So what's going to be step number 2? How far can we go? So definitely it's an open session and public is going to watch. And then is going to be any expectation from us, or just a matter of numbers?
I think that's part of the presentation. They'll be able to tell us if we have jurisdiction. If we do, what are the elements? That would be part of the presentation.
Is that, Commissioner Gazarian, is that what you have in your mind?
Thank you. What I envisioned was simply to make an inquiry. I am not trying to, at this point, suggest that I think something ought to be done that's not being done, and therefore we, as a commission here, should have a say-so in the matter. I just, at the outset, preliminarily, I just want to know some of the individuals that I have come to know, who I do no longer see on the force, and I've come to know that they're on administrative leave, and I could think of 3 right off the bat. I'd like to know when, if ever, there will be a resolution as to their fate. So, if there's something that comes up after there's a responsive presentation that causes me personally, as a member of this commission, to feel the urge to inquire further or to seek and review whether or not this commission has any authority for making any sort of suggestions or directives, I will certainly share it with my colleagues on the commission, and I will not be shy about sharing it with Mr. Doyle and others. But at this point, I just want to know what, if anything, has happened, and where is the light at the end of the tunnel, if any.
I like the idea, I'm sorry, Commissioner Malika. I like the idea that if we can do something, be a kind of a constructive authorities over here, if somehow we can manage to terminate this kind of hostilities, I assume it's hostilities, whatever is this. So I'm coming from the background of mediation, so I'd like to see that everything get together. So I don't know, maybe we are going to find a way to sort the problems, if it's possible, and try to eliminate all these problems, and look forward for a new future, and even in our force to see what we can do.
Okay, well, at this point,
if we can do, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, at this point, I'm not sure if there is a problem, and that's why we're going to have the report to find out. And once we get the report on what the status is of the entire city, and I agree with Mr. Gandis, that's what we should be doing, then we can take the next step, if necessary, if there's a problem, and figure out what we need to do, if anything. And I'm sorry, Ms. Farpedian?
It was just a cautionary remark. My concern was for the depth of the discussion that's happening at this point. This is not an agendized item. I do understand that multiple commissioners are interested in hearing about this item. We'll agendize it properly. If you've got specific concerns that you'd like to see in the report, I would suggest that you direct them to Mr. Doyle so that he can make certain that he covers it in the report when it's due.
Thank you. I think we've said enough on this one.
Certainly, yes.
Okay, thank you. Are there any more commissioner comments? Mr. Gandis?
No.
Oh, Gloria?
No, thank you.
Okay. Then we'll move back to our next item on the regular agenda.
Revised class specification for approval, recycling coordinator.
Mr. Chair,
Doyle?
members of the Commission, this is a revision of an existing class specification. It's actually a position that we're reactivating after many years. We've been in the recycling business for over 20 years here at the City of Glendale, and we're revising both the recycling coordinator classification as well as the next item. In item number 8 is the integrated waste planning series. Both of these series, again, are needing updated. They last been updated many, many years ago. And I think the emphasis this time is sort of beyond the traditional recycling the city's been doing. We're looking at implementation of what's known as the Zero Waste Plan, which was approved by the council last month. And it's the effort to now divert up to 75% of our waste away from our landfills. And again, this classification we will probably be filling shortly, and so we wanted to make sure it was, again, up to date and covers the needs that we have. Again, the next item is item number 8 is the integrated waste planning series. Very similar at the type series focusing on the zero waste plan. And once again, we've updated this to make sure that it addresses all of the state mandates. We have Assembly Bill 939, which is quite old, and then Assembly Bill 341, which is more recent legislation focused on our waste reduction efforts. If we could, it'd be these two specifications. If they could be taken together, that would be helpful because they both relate to the similar functions handled by our Public Works Integrated Waste Management Department. We do have several people from Integrated Waste here. First of all, Steve Nersessian from my staff worked on these specifications, and we have Mario Nunez from Integrated Waste here, as well as Tom Brady, also from Integrated Waste. Either of them would be happy to discuss waste with you.
Is that called trash talk? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Bunch of garbage to me.
Very interesting stuff.
Mr. Chairman,
Oh.
I would suggest on the basis of Mr. Doyle's suggestion that you ask the Secretary to read item number 7. Also, at the same time, I don't think, since we're not dealing with finances, if I'm not mistaken, Ms. Verapetian, we can consider both of them at the same time, I think. Am I correct?
Yeah, we can do that, can we?
Because we have no finances. These are just specs.
Correct.
I have questions.
Okay,
Well,
let her
let's-
read that one.
Let's read it into the record so that we're properly on it. That was what I was saying. Thank you.
Item number 8, revised class specification, integrated waste planning series.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I meant, yes, 8. Thank you.
Yes.
I have a couple of questions. One, with respect to the recycling coordinator. I see that on page 2 of 3, top of the page, on the right-hand column, we have what appears to be previously a description of prepares monthly and quarterly reports as required under state grant contract. That has been deleted. My question is, who then does that task? Somebody else, I assume, does that task? Or is that task no longer being performed at all? I would think not.
Let me have Mr. Nunez address that specific
Question.
or Mr. Brady.
Please.
Good afternoon. I'm Mario Nunez, the Integrated Waste Administrator, Public Works Department. I wasn't paying attention who asked the question, so...
It was I.
Okay, Commissioner Kazarian. Basically, to answer the question, we deleted that because we are not really under any state grant programs as we were back in 1992.
Okay.
These days, we actually do more of fee collection from private haulers and things like that, which is quite different from what it used to 20 years ago.
I see. And while I have you, I don't know if it is also your area of responsibility. I've moved on to item number 8 with respect to the integrated waste planning series. Under definition on page 1 of 3, I see that we have also a couple of deletions from starting off with performing professional and technical work, but more importantly, the second deletion, preparing the city's annual source reduction and recycling element update, and last but not least, on page 3 of 3, it appears to be deleted, the portion that previously stated maintains and monitors the city's solid waste services permit system. My question is, who, if anyone, is now performing these tasks, if at all?
Yes. Commissioner Gazarian, in regard to the first deletion, preparing the city annual source reduction and recycling element update, back in 1989, under AB 939, which still is a state mandate, the county and the city had to develop a comprehensive plan to see how the cities, any jurisdiction in LA County, could achieve a 50% diversion by the year 2000. It took several years just to write that book and get to 50%. The city of Glendale was successful to achieve that threshold before the year 2000. Since then, the business has changed and more stringent regulations have come from the state. AB 939 could appear to be obsolete in terms of what the state is now requiring from the city of Glendale, which is a very significant expectation that the city of Glendale as a whole recycles 75% of the waste stream basically 9 years from now or less. So not an easy road. In the whole scope of things, other elements have changed. In regard to the second deletion you mentioned, I think is...
Actually, if I may interrupt you respectfully, you addressed the second deletion. The first one was the one above it.
Okay, yes.
Performing professional and technical work.
Basically what we did was an expansion on, I'm not trying to minimize the importance of this position, but in the whole scheme of things, we believe that a recycling coordinator will best serve the purposes of providing a leading, to be the leading strategist in regard to source reduction efforts. And the more junior integrated waste planner, not a senior one, an integrated planner would basically fall under the umbrella of the recycling coordinator. That's what we were trying to intend with kind of changing the language in here.
Very well. And if you may address my last concern, I would be grateful. On page 3 of 3, the top of the page, on our agenda, the maintaining and monitoring the solid waste services permit system.
Right. The city of Glendale today does not have a permit system. This is an open market. We're a non-franchised system in Glendale. Anybody who wants to do business in the city of Glendale is open to come in here. In fact, if anybody who wants to come here and open a small trash company, whole construction and demolition debris, they just got to get the typical business permit, which doesn't even fall under our umbrella anymore. So this is basically something that we're not doing anymore.
So then if that's the case, when we're referring to solid waste, correct me if I'm wrong, solid waste, and I'm not a specialist by any means in this area, it does not include hazardous waste, obviously, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
I think we're all a specialist because
Okay.
we all have to, we generate trash, we generate recycling, so we know somehow a portion of that. In the city of Glendale, the hazardous waste portion is handled by the fire department. We help the fire department in terms of electronic waste collection, which the city of Glendale benefits from that. Batteries, things like that. For the most, hazardous waste is really handled by the fire department.
Very well. Thank you kindly.
So what you're saying, there's a single item in Glendale that we don't require permits for? Is that something that could be moved down to the other departments?
I did not want to touch that one.
First time I've heard something we don't want permits for. Thank you.
Does that mean that Mr. Ganis can open up a new business?
I think like,
Anybody who, yeah.
fecal management, I can take care of that.
I just had
I do that every day.
two questions for Mr. Doyle. I'm assuming both these updates have gone by the city management, the employee management unions,
Yes.
although it doesn't mention it in the report.
The Glendale Management Association.
Okay, thank you. With that,
Move 7 and 8.
That's it.
and moved and seconded, any objection? Have unanimous consent. Next item.
Report on CalPERS and city employee pension benefits.
I think we're finally going to get to this item. It's been put off. This was one that Mr. Mnuchin brought up many, many months ago, and I'm anxious to hear about it tonight. So we'll turn to Mr. Doyle and ask for his report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. Again, this item was a request made by Commissioner Mnuchin several months ago. We prepared it, and I think what we attempted to do is just give a broad overview of CalPERS, what it's about, and how it affects us here in the city of Glendale. As the report says, the CalPERS system was established in 1932. I believe Glendale's participation in CalPERS as the pension for Glendale city employees began around 1945. What it provides for is what's known as a defined benefit plan, and that's something that you don't see much anymore, at least in the private sector, but in the public sector, it's almost the exclusive means of providing pension. And under this type of a pension plan, a retirement is a set formula with a pension based, in this case, on the years of service, number of years with the particular agency, and that pension amount is based on the employee's final compensation. Unlike many of the traditional 401k plans and things like that, those are known as defined contribution plans. Defined benefit plan, again, provides a great deal of stable and consistent certainty for those receiving those pensions, whereas a 401k plan, which is very prevalent in the private sector, has ebbs and flows based on the investments returns and the stock market. The defined benefit plan, such as what CalPERS provides, does provide that stable type of really a lifetime pension based on a certain amount, again, based on the number of years of service and the highest salary of that employee. Like most public agencies, the City of Glendale has two categories in the PERS system, one being the public safety category. Typically, that is a sort of a richer benefit because public safety employees typically have a shorter career span. And then the other category is a miscellaneous category. So you have safety and miscellaneous. You can see from the chart the various formulas are listed as it pertains to the City of Glendale. The miscellaneous employees have what's known as either the 2.5 at 55 plan or the 2% at 55 plan. And that really is largely determined on when an employee was hired, because in the last couple of years we have negotiated second-tier proposals with all of our respective bargaining units. So for the miscellaneous employees, we have 2 at 50 and 2.5 at 55. I'm sorry, 2 at 55 and 2.5 at 55. For our sworn fire and sworn police, in both of those groups, we have also negotiated second-tier plans. We have, again, for the police and fire, both 3 at 50 for the employees hired prior to 2011 with the fire department, have the 3 at 50. For those hired after January 1, 2011, it's a 3 at 55 plan. And the police department, employees hired prior to January 1st, 2012, have the 3 at 50 plan. Those hired after January 1, 2012, it's a 3 at 55 plan. Again, the determination of benefits is done, and I hate to keep referring to charts, but it's really the only way to adequately explain how it works. But it's looked at by calculating and multiplying the employee's total year of service by the benefit factor. And if I could just use an example, if you look at the top of page 2, we have an example of an accountant. Let's say retiring under the 2% at 55 plan. That's the bottom one. And let's say hypothetically that the individual has 18 years of service, and they're at the 2% 55 plan, and you take that 18 years of service and multiply it by 2%, it comes to 36%. The column that says compensation, that's the single highest year of compensation, and that $5,380, that amounts to, if you take 36% of $55,380, you end up with a monthly retirement benefit of $1,937. And that's more or less how it works. And again, obviously an individual with longer years of service is going to have a higher benefit. The more years of service you put in, the greater the benefit. Obviously, as well, the higher the compensation, the larger that pension benefit is going to be ultimately. But you see, the difference between the safety formulas, which tend to be more generous, and the miscellaneous formulas. And again, that's all based upon the fact that firefighters and police officers tend to have shorter careers. It's a more strenuous line of work. It's a line of work where we do tend to encourage them to retire when their body tends to wear out. You see most of the firefighters and police officers retiring in their early 50s, whereas most city employees, other city employees in the miscellaneous category, can work much later, late 50s and early 60s, which is typically what you see. Moving on the report, it talks about membership. All employees who become city employees, they begin paying into the system immediately upon their hire as a salaried employee. If you're a part-time or hourly employee, you begin participating once you've reached 1,000 hours of employment. So once you reach that, you become enrolled, and that's when your service credit begins accruing, depending again on how long you work. There's a lot of discussion about the financial costs of these pensions. So I want to talk a bit about how PERS is funded. And really they're funded by two primary means. The first is by what's known as employee contributions, and that's a fixed amount, which it's generally a percentage of the salary. For miscellaneous employees, it's either going to be 7 or 8% of their salary. For safety employees, it's going to be 9%. And again, that's the kind of the fixed amount, and that's what goes into what's known as the employee contribution. There's also the employer contribution, and that's typically what ends up being the higher amount that's paid. That's the amount that fluctuates each year largely based on actuarial valuations and the investment returns. And just to give an example of how those numbers do fluctuate, if we're referring to the employer contribution, back in the late 1990s, early 2000s, when the dot-com businesses were doing really well, the stock market was doing well, we actually were given advice and direction from CalPERS that the system was so well funded that they called it being superfunded, and the employer contributions went down to zero for most employers at that time. And in the city of Glendale's case, it was at zero for, I believe, about 2.5 years, 2001, 2002, 2003, as the stock market kind of slowed down a bit. And during during this past decade, we've seen salaries climb. bit in most public agencies, that so-called super funding ended up ultimately being largely a myth, and PERS began to require more and more from each employer, and the employer rate has steadily risen. As you can see from the chart on the middle of page 2, the employer contributions here at the City of Glendale for our miscellaneous employees currently are at 15.66%, and contribution for the safety employees is up to 30.3%. And again, as I said, it was only about 10 years ago that CalPERS was saying we're super funded, and that amount was at zero. That mistake is probably not ever going to be made again. I think CalPERS is a lot more realistic now, and they're doing a much better job, and they're doing their actuarial analyses. And we anticipate the employer contribution rates being at this level and possibly higher in the upcoming years. So, but again, that chart there does show, again, for each of those formulas, what the employee contribution rate is, as well as the employer contribution. Essentially, that's how the system is funded. One thing somewhat unique about the City of Glendale is that our employees do pay their entire employee contribution rate. That's the 7, 8, or 9%. It may sound odd, but most employers, most other cities, county governments, special districts that utilize PERS end up paying the employee's share on top of the employer's share. So the organization takes the brunt of fully funding this. Glendale is largely ahead of the game. We have been requiring our employees to pay that portion. On top of that, we also have our employees pay a portion of the employer's share as well. Those are things that we've negotiated with our various bargaining units. And that is something where, again, we're well ahead of the game with many of the other employers out there. So, as an example, in our cost sharing of the employer contributions, our GCA employees, for example, pay 1.5% of their salary of that employer contribution. Our management employees pay 3%. Our police employees pay 3.5%. Our fire employees pay 2%. And that's on top of the 7, 8, or 9% employee contribution. So our employees are fully participating in helping to fund this system. Most of the other agencies that we are temporary agencies are beginning to do that now, and looking at some of the governor's proposals for pension reforms, they may end up requiring up to the employees to pay up to half of the cost of the employee and the employer's share. Those are some of the proposals being discussed right now. A lot of concern, both statewide and, of course, locally, on how we're going to continue to fund this system. And I will say again, Glendale has been ahead of the game with regard to not only doing the second tier arrangements, but also with the cost sharing as far as the employee and employer contributions. A couple other things I do want to mention that talked about the employee second tier system. We also I didn't mention that in our negotiations we have all of our groups gone away from what's known as the single highest year final compensation, and that's again the part of this where we look at the rate that what the pension is going to be based upon. Prior to probably 2-3 years ago, all of our groups were based on a final compensation that was based on the employee's single highest year of earnings. What we've done is gone back and negotiated again with all of our groups in a second tier to have the final compensation, the PERSable compensation, based on the average of 3 years. So that way, if somebody gets promoted, all of a sudden their salary goes up and they work just 1 year. Under the old system, that 1 year would determine their pension for the remainder of their life. Now, under the average of 3 years, that gets averaged out with the 2 other years. So it's the pension that it's going to be based on is going to be based on a lower amount. Again, these are things that Glendale has done specifically to ensure that our system is well funded and sustainable. A couple of things that I do want to mention. We talk about what it takes to become fully vested in CalPERS. Typically, an employee has to work a full 5 years to become vested. If they resign or leave here prior to being fully vested in 5 years, they get all of their contributions that they have made back, refunded to them upon leaving. But once they've reached 5 years, and they presumably they will retire with some form of a pension, even if it's only based on a few years of service beyond the 5 years. Additionally, I do want to talk about 2 other things. One, disability retirement. Employees who do become disabled and are unable to perform their usual duties, their current position, due to either a work-related injury, illness, or a non-work-related illness or injury. There are retirement plans available that would provide for that. And the other thing I wanted to mention was employment after retirement. Typically, if an employee does retire, there's been a lot of talk about can that person re-enter employment with the City of Glendale or any PERS employer, and they can. And oftentimes it's the case that either for a short period of time or individual has some type of expertise that is needed to continue on. An employer will hire that individual back on an hourly capacity, and that's fully legal for that to be done. However, that employee can only cannot work any more than 960 hours in that fiscal year. If they get anywhere close to 960 hours, then we send up warning signals, and they have to stop working. Otherwise, work beyond that, we essentially have to reinstate them as employees, and any pensions that they've already been paid out on, they'd have to pay that back. But where it occurs here in the City of Glendale, we monitor those hours very closely and make sure that no one gets close to 960 hours. But it's an important issue that comes up, and there have been a lot of discussion about it. The term double dipping is thrown out there quite a bit, and and certainly, without making a value judgment on whether that's appropriate or not, there is often a need for experienced public sector professionals with highly specialized skills in the post-retirement setting to occasionally bring them back to do some work, either to fill in for someone, or even if it's just to transition those services before someone else new is hired to take their place. But anyway, that's how the post-retirement employment works. So I tried to give, again, a brief overview of how CalPERS works in general, and if you have questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them. I will say I am not an expert on this. I'm not an actuarial. I'm not necessarily a numbers guy, but I do my best to try and answer your questions if you.
I have a couple. Before I forget, this last part when you talk about, for example, double dipping, I understand if that individual, once they retire...
Can't hear you.
Sorry?
Is your microphone on? Because I can't hear you. I can't hear you. Speak up.
What I was trying to say is this issue, for example, double dipping, when somebody retires, they still have the right to, if they decide to go work somewhere else, correct? Are they restricted from, just because somebody retires from the city doesn't mean that they can't go work somewhere else, can they?
Commissioner Mnuchin, that's correct. any PERS retiree is free to work wherever they like or for whomever they like. The only restriction they have is if they are hired back at a PERS agency, they cannot.
That's where the 960 comes in.
That's
and
correct.
Is that per year or is that total?
That's per fiscal year.
Okay. All right. That was one of the questions. The other question that I wanted to get a little bit more clarification. So if this employer contributions that they're talking about, and when they determine that, I'm assuming it has something to do also with the returns on their investments that they do. So if they screw up the investment process, at the end of the day, they just send out the bill to the people who employers that are contributing, and that's where that number changes, correct?
That's correct, Commissioner Manoukian. We get a bill, and we're notified, it's about October of every year, what our next, the next July payment, it's not actually a payment, but it's what the employer rate will become effective July of the next year. So we're given some lead time. As we're doing our budgeting, we can figure out what we're going to end up having to pay. But that's a non-negotiable. They tell us what we have to pay, and we pay it.
And you have absolutely no control over that. I mean, it is what it is.
We have zero control. We do have minor control, again, over things like our cost of living increases, the setting of our own salaries, and those things do factor into
your contribution.
Yeah, if we gave 10% raises to our employees every year, that's going to cause our contributions and to increase. But for the most part, much of this is out of our control.
Okay, and when the employee retires, from that point on, their contributions stop too, or do they? How does that work?
Their contributions stop.
But yours, as the employer, continues.
That's correct.
Until the end of your contract. Okay. Until the individual no longer receives that, that's when your portion dedicated for that individual stops. Correct.
Well, that's correct. But again, we get the number, the figure that we're going to have to start paying from CalPERS, and our relationship with that retired employee is severed from that point. We're not paying them anymore. They're getting their paycheck from CalPERS, directly from CalPERS.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to say, Matt, I think I heard you say, I think your question was, if the retiree is receiving, we still contribute on the retiree. Once the retiree retires, we stop contributing. The employee stops, the employer stops, and all he does is get his money from the retirement, him or he or she.
Okay, then I misunderstood.
Yeah, well, I thought that. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So, I see. So, when they retire, as far as the city is concerned and the employee is concerned, everything stops on their end. They just get their monthly checks directly.
That is correct. And again, the issue of control. I mean, if somebody retires very young, that means they're going to be living longer, and if that occurs, then that would adversely affect the employer. So yeah, there's all kinds of things that would affect that, but the primary issues have to do with things like demographics, the age, the overall health. Obviously, if everyone retired and then died within 5 years, that would cost these cities a lot less. But the fact is, life expectancies are long, and have employees living in their 70s and 80s, and so the longer these payments are made, the cost there is.
And I mean, at least from what I am seeing, this can eventually be uncontrollable in the sense that for some cities. And who came up with this idea? And who agreed to this? I mean, I know it's been around for a long time, but I could really see this becoming a really humongous. I guess that's all the question. Oh, the other portion that you were saying that we require our employees to pay a portion of the employers, and other cities, they don't. Actually, it's the other way around. The employer is paying the employees' portion of it. And I guess
both, Commissioner Manoukian. most agencies out there fully pay the employee share and the employer share. They're footing the whole bill. We have, for many years, had our employees pay the employee contribution, and more recently, we've had our employees pay a portion. It's not a lot, but it's enough to, it's a sacrifice.
Sure.
A portion of that employer contribution. That's almost unheard of elsewhere. But again, as some of these cities are facing some really sizable employer contributions, it's really all they can do to get their hands around this. So, and that'll be the future. And again, whatever pension reform proposals are out there, whether it's the governor's plan or the legislature comes up with something, or there might be an initiative passed by the voters, almost certainly involve establishing different tiers and also greater levels of employee contribution. That's why, again, if something like that were to occur, it's not going to be such a shock to Glendale City employees, because we've already been paying a good portion of these contributions. But some agencies, it's going to be a big hit to these public employees.
That's all the questions that I had. Very helpful for me. Thank you.
I have a couple of questions, but go ahead.
I think there is one area that I want to explore on this when a retiree retires. If, for instance, if an employee, if a police officer in the city of Glendale worked here 5 years and eventually retired as a police chief in the city of Pasadena, for instance, if that's as a PERS agency, correct? I think there is a supplemental charge, am I not mistaken, Matt, for the higher rate of retirement. You pay 5/30ths of that higher rate of retirement. In other words, you contribute to the fact that you didn't give as much because he or she was at a lower pay rate. Am I correct?
Commissioner Gantz, as I understand it, I don't know what the specific formula is. It's all calculated actuarially. But when somebody works in multiple agencies, they all pay a portion. They all are affected by that pensioner's retirement amount. And typically the agency that takes the biggest hit is going to be the one that they were at the longest.
So, so that is an exception to when they retire. One of the questions I have, or a question I have, I note that we have the 2% at 55 and the 2% at 50. Is there a cap on the percentage? In other words, if you have 40 years at 2%, do you get 80%, or are you capped at 65 or 75? Or?
Under the miscellaneous plans, there is no cap.
Okay.
The formula never goes above 2.5 in the 2.5 at 55 plan. In the 2 at 55 plan, I believe it escalates up to about, I think it's about 2.4 when you get up to be like 63 at that age. But if you put in like 40 years or 45 years under a miscellaneous plan, there is no cap.
So it can be over 100%.
Correct. However,
okay.
I mean, and at that point it becomes, you have to ask the question, well, why am I still working if I can make more? Except in public safety, under the safety plan, there is a cap of 90%.
So if they work, if whomever works 30 years and receives 3%, or 50 years and receives 3%, it's going to be 90% of their...
They have to have worked 30 years and have to have reached 50 years. 50 years is the minimum age for
But if let's assume they work 40 years and they waited to be 60 when they retired, they're still capped at 90%.
Correct.
Okay. That's just public safety.
That's just with public safety.
But if that were a miscellaneous employee and that employee got up, so it could be 105%.
Yes, thank you. I have a question that is actually the other side of the coin. I see under the two-tiered system that the 2% at 55 is, after January 1st, 2011, miscellaneous employees hired are going to be the beneficiaries at that rate. What if someone retires before they're 55 years of age? Do they then get a pro rata lesser percentage as opposed to the 2%?
Commissioner Kazarian, it is prorated under the 2.5% at 55 plan. An individual could retire at age 50, but they would only get 2% at age 50, and they would get, if they were retired at 51, it would be approximately 2.1. If it was 52, it would be about 2.2. But to get the full 2.5, they'd have to put in, all their service time and retire at 55.
And you mentioned earlier, Mr. Doyle, about the average of the 3 highest years. My first question as to that is it the 3 highest years, or is it the last 3 years?
It's the 3 highest years.
3 highest years. And
it doesn't necessarily have to be the last 3.
Very well.
Typically, it's been, most people retire at their highest salary, but, lately we've had some negotiations where, and it's happened all over the place, where there have been pay reductions and things like that, or if somebody has been demoted, their last year may not be their highest compensation year, and you'd have to go back a couple years.
when we talk about when we talk about highest year, are we including highest year as a base salary or overtime pay as well, if there is such a calculation?
It includes various extra pay items, but not overtime. Overtime is not included. And so the stories you hear about somebody making $80,000 a year who actually made $200,000 because they, worked every overtime shift that was available. Common misconception that that's going to affect their retirement base. Doesn't happen.
And reading this report, it appears that perhaps at least the sworn fire personnel or their representatives did right by them, because it appears that they will be still operating on the single highest annual salary until 2014. Can you elaborate on that? Is that a unique situation as opposed to police department or other agencies within the city?
Commissioner Kazarian, that was kind of a unique situation, and it was, say, the dynamics of the particular negotiations that were occurring at that time. But they have agreed to go to the average of 3 years at that date in the future.
And other than under the heading disability retirement, there is the reference to safety employees. Other than fire and police personnel, are there any other employees within the city of Glendale that are classified as safety employees that I can think of?
No, sworn police and fire would
Very well. Thank you.
qualify.
I don't see where the civil service commissioners, at what rate do they?
We're above sworn personnel.
I don't see anything in here.
We're at Dictionary's rate.
Oh, my God. Then we're doing fine.
I'm not sure how high your single highest year would be either.
0, huh? Okay.
They told me I was going to get 90% of my highest year of salary, which is 90% of zero. How much is that, Art? Isn't that zero?
More than you're making now.
It's less than 0, actually. You have to give some money into it.
This really helps some of the misconception out there. You hear all these different stories but from what you're telling me, a lot of these guys they're paying for throughout the years, they've been contributing to this. And thank you. This was very helpful.
And keep in mind, Commissioner Manukian, the employee contribution. Everyone assumes that when the salaries are listed, the various interest groups always want to know what the public employees make. It includes their salary, but you have to really chop off about 10, 12% off of that, because they're paying their contribution to PERS, and that's not factored into. But that does, that does cut into an individual's salary, and it's not commonly understood.
Well, I, for one, want to thank the City of Glendale employees for contributing to the extent that they appear to be contributing, apparently more so than other employees of other cities. I often say it's a calling, and apparently it's not just a calling. They also have to pay for that calling out of their pocket.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Gregorian was next.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Well, I assume you mentioned that we are not alone in this whole situation, and there are so many other cities. Is there any negotiation, discussion, anything happening between the cities and CalPERS people? Because continuation of this situation is going to be financial disaster for the cities. I'm not talking about just the Glendale, just overall. Because we don't have any control. What is next year is going to be, instead of 15%, 30%, 40%, 50%, is going to wipe out any kind of reserve amount that we have. And right now we do have a problem in the city of Glendale, I assume. I've heard that is one of the problems, that financial problem is going to be these CalPERS figures. Would you elaborate if there is anything going on or anything is happening?
Yeah, Commissioner Gregorian, as I said, there are various efforts being looked at as far as, again, reforming the system. And I think it's almost inevitable that by November of this year, we'll see either something passed and signed by the governor or some type of initiative on the ballot that will attempt to, I would say, probably radically modify these formulas and make them much less generous for future hires. As it pertains to current employees, very little can be done with regard to affecting or modifying existing formula that somebody was hired under, because it's recognized as a contractual agreement between the employee and the CalPERS system. But there will be some type of reform in place where these formulas will be modified. There'll be more asked of employees as far as their contributions. And on the other end of things, there have been a lot of, I should say, scandals involving representatives from CalPERS and some of the people managing some of those assets, some of whom have been criminally prosecuted. CalPERS is attempting to clean up its act as well to ensure that we don't have any further problems with the people who manage these monies and do the investments. And CalPERS has also instituted efforts to sort of, the term, smooth a lot of their rates and make it so there's not so many ebbs and flows in the market, and that the employer contributions don't go up and down so rapidly, because it really is very difficult for public employers everywhere at the local level to try and constantly try to budget for their payments to CalPERS. It's just a difficult thing to do. So I think there's a lot of things being done. We'll know more probably by the end of this calendar year. See what the future will be.
I hate to have to see that the solid waste business in the city of Glendale would require a permit to generate revenue to pay for this.
You leave that alone.
They don't need more suggestions regarding that.
I can bring that up.
I think we've spent enough time.
Why don't we get to comment? Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, I think the important part of this is to realize, number one, and I think Mr. Gazarian, touched on this. We're very fortunate to have employees that have negotiated and contributed. I think one of the things to remember, those of us, not us, I'm not one, those of you out there that have salaries in the non-public sector pay into Social Security. You pay 7.15%, of which 1.25% is Medicare, and that 1.25% is also paid by the public employees. So we have, in the case of miscellaneous employees that are paying 8% plus 1.5%, they're actually paying what employees in the non-public sector are paying 7.15%, they're paying over 11% into the same type of thing. They don't get Social Security. This is all they get from their public employment. But they still do pay into Medicare plus more of a retirement. But I think it's important to remember this. All of these formulas, all of these things are applying to those people that are hired now or hired after January 1, 2011. When you have the average employee having to put in the 20 or 25 or 30 years, the effective rate of some of this stuff is, if we're looking for something to happen immediately, other than changing employer contributions, they're not going to change that much. This is something for the future, and what we need to do is to understand that, and understand that while the cities and counties are still going to have to grope with this for at least 30 more years, while there might be some reduction, there might be some contribution, it's nice and it's very much appreciated. It's still not the overall pension reform that's not going to be effective for at least 20, if not 30 years from now. That's all I have to say. But I think it's important to note how appreciative we should be to the city employees that have agreed to these contributions, not only the non-sworn, but the sworn as well.
Okay, with that, I want to thank Mr. Doyle for a fantastic, outstanding report, very comprehensive. I want to thank Mr. Manukian for suggesting it. I think it helped us as well as anybody in the public. And with that, I'd like to move on to
Mr. Chair, can I acknowledge Alex Soto? He's the young man back there who put this report together.
Thank you, Alex.
Good job, Alex. Thank you.
Okay, with that, I'll ask our secretary for the next item.
Agenda forecast.
Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, our next meeting, the only item we have listed thus far is the quarterly report on our advertising budget expenditures. We do anticipate the need to bring a few more items, perhaps specifications and a bulletin perhaps for that meeting. The report that Commissioner Kazarian asked for, hopefully I'll try to get that for the February 8th meeting, if that is acceptable to the Commission. And in addition to those items, the general stuff that we have, as you know, your workload is very busy with hearings, and we have more to come. So.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I'd just like to mention that on February 22nd, I will not be here. No loud cheers, please.
Okay. With that, we're going to adjourn the closed session, and we will be reporting out, at which time, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr.
I don't believe we are.
I don't believe you're reporting out. I think you have only one closed session item. Am I correct?
Well, it shows 2 on the agenda. Are we down to 1?
You have 1 or 2, Harold.
What a smile.
Okay.
So we won't be reporting.
All right, we will not be reporting out then. I'll ask for a motion. to adjourn.
Commissioner Devine, we skipped an item. Number 11, reports and information.
Okay. Do you have any reports?
We have none.
Any information?
We have none.
Okay. I still will ask for a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Okay, we are adjourned.
Well, you don't adjourn. Oh, we're not reporting out.